It's Shalom, everyone. Great to see you all. And
Shalom.
we are, today is January 4th, 2021, new year. Happy 2021 to everyone. We're glad to see you all. And it's a new year, but it's the same Torah. So, but it actually is a new Sefer, a new book in the Torah, and that is the book of Shmot. The book of Shemot is a remarkably important, complex book. We will meet in this book new facets of Torah, namely legislation. We will meet, of course, the central character that will dominate the next four books, Moshe. But before we get to all of that, we are in the beginnings of the transition from the family of Israel to the people of Israel. And we are in the beginning of the transition from the people as it is situated in Egypt in a kind of benign, mutually interdependent relationship to, of course, a relationship that is beginning to be a persecutory relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites. And that's what we're going to focus on today and look at this really, I mean, in a really close magnification here, see what is going on here, exploring both the text, the Midrashim, and as usual, I have some other material that is so helpful to see. And here, as a rabbi, I'm going to say I make a very strong link between the biblical text, the rabbinic tradition, and the historical experience of the Jewish people, in that we frame our historical experience by these archetypes, by the text. In another presentation, I've called this proto-anti-Semitism. And you'll see why in a few minutes. But what we'll do is we'll look carefully at the text, and we'll look carefully at the midrashic amplifications of the text. So with that, I'm going to start with our text here, and it is as follows: New Pharaoh, new policies, new reactions, new era. Here is the first. Well, it's not the first. Yeah, the first 14 verses of the book of Shemot. These are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zvulun, Binyamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70. Joseph being already in Egypt. Joseph died, and all his brothers and all that generation. Vayamot Yosef v'chol echav v'chol adorahu. This is going to be a very important verse in our discussion. Vayamot Yosef, he died, all his brothers v'chol adorahu. But the Israelites were fertile and prolific. They multiplied and increased very greatly, so that the land was filled with them. And now here is our big verse. Vayakom melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yadat Yosef. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them, so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. They built garrison cities for Pharaoh. Pitom and Ram says, the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites various labors, and they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor and mortar and bricks, with all sorts of tasks in the field. So I'll just stop here for a second and go back. So this is familiar to us in a sense that it's the Passover story. It's the beginning of the Passover story. We get a few pieces of information, of course, things that we are reminded of, how the people, they are a family. They come down in as basically the brothers and their as a clan. They come down as a clan to Egypt. The brothers, Jacob has died already. We saw this past Shabbat. Jacob is taken back to Egypt, to Canaan, and been buried there. You recall I made a whole political excursus on that, saying that is the Egyptian show of force, and I have my issues with Joseph and his role. But what we are going to see here, so we have the clan of Israel now firmly established in Egypt, and we have this subtle moment. This is the transition moment. I always like to point this out because this is key to understanding the Bible, and it's a key way to understand how to read the Bible. You have to read the Bible, every single word. Every single word is important in terms of giving you loads and loads of information. So I'll go back to the text and we'll show you that here we have between verses 7, 8, and 9, the key moment of transition. So Joseph died, Vayamot Yosef, Uvenei Yisrael paru v'yishutzu. So we do not know the time lapse between verse 6 and 7. What we could say here is, and this will be important in our discussion, is that contemporary with the death of Joseph is also the proliferation of the Israelites. In other words, they're starting to prurvu, they're starting to get numerous during the time of Joseph already. They multiplied and increased very greatly during the time of Joseph. All right, but he is dead, and so that generation is dead, meaning he and all his brothers are dead. So the next generation, they're going at it. They are becoming a very prolific generation. If there are 70 members of this generation, well, there could very well be hundreds. The rabbis say that there were 6 births, in every pregnancy there were 6 tuplets. I mean, based on the word paru v'yishurtzu v'yirbu v'yatzu v'ma'od, there are 6 words, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the rabbis make a beautiful midrash that says that the reason why they were able to flourish is because each birth was a birth of 6 tuplets, meaning then that you have exponential growth here. The new king arises. All right, we'll talk about him in a second. And then he says to his people, Vayomer el amo, hine, and now the critical words, Am b'nei Yisrael. Forget the rest of the words. Am b'nei Yisrael. And this is the moment that you have the word Am, the nation. First time in the Bible where the Bible itself refers to the people not as B'nai Israel, but as Am B'nai Israel. That is very, very significant. Okay. Second thing is, he is now putting oppositional distance between his nation and the other nation. Very significant. So the verse is structured. He speaks to his people, Vayomer el amo, and he says, Hine am b'nei Israel. There is a people, meaning they are not our people. And so what you have here in this verse, between these words, is the kernel of differentiation, opposition, and what I'm calling proto-anti-Semitism. In other words, the beginning of seeing the other as the other, an alien group in your midst, and enacting policies against that group, which are disclosed in the following verses. Okay, so now, having said that we are referring to Bnei Israel as an Am, let's go back to this verse here. Vayakom melech hadash al Mitzrayim. The rabbis are quite perplexed about this term, and they're focusing in on this for the 2 reasons that always give rise to rabbinic midrash, to rabbinic explanation. One is text, and one is, I would say, theology, philosophy, ideas, the conversation. What's the textual problem and what's the bigger problem? And here we go to the rabbis. This is SHMOT Rabbah. It exists in other versions in the Talmud, in Tractate Sota, Tractate Ta'anit, I believe it is. Vayakam Melech Hadash, a new king arose. When the Egyptians saw how much the Israelite population began to increase, they promulgated new decrees against them. This is what the text means when it says a new king arose. So we'll just spend a second on this for a second. It's not the core of our conversation today. But what is interesting here is the rabbis are revealing a certain kind of truth here, and there's a tension here, because the tension is the king and the populace, the king and the public opinion. Okay, because of Jewish history and because of our own understanding of the Holocaust, we do superimpose certain things here. But one thing I would say as a truth proposition in anti-Semitism throughout history, without the willing acquiescence or the active involvement of the public, the rulers' edicts are less powerful. The question then becomes, who is leading whom? Does the public lead the king to enact decrees, or does the king lead the public in shaping public opinion? This is a big debate. We're not going to be able to solve the debate, but this is what's happening here. When the rabbis say here, it's the Egyptians, kevan shira'u hamitzrim kach, chidshu gzerot alehem. The Egyptians made it. So you can say, that Pharaoh, in this point of view, with this political philosophy, Pharaoh is putting his finger to the wind and seeing which way the wind is blowing. And he's following the people. Pharaoh, up until now, Egyptian policy, if you will, has been pro-Jewish. But the people see that there are a lot of them. And the people are upset with that. And that's why Pharaoh becomes anti-Jewish. They start having difficulties with the Jewish population. I'm using the word anachronistically. And it's new. A new king arose, and that ought to mean something. That ought to mean that it's a new set of policies. So we have, is it the king, or is it the policies, or is it both? So now, based on this text, based on the verse, Vayakom Melech Hadash, two rabbis of the 3rd century, Rav and Shmuel, who often disagree. These are rabbis that are always in their own state of debate, perpetual debate, disagree in their interpretation. Chad Amar, Chadash Mamash. Nice rhyme. One said he was actually a new king. Chad Amar, Shenit Chadshuk Zerotav. So it's a much more insightful interpretation. One says, look, it was an actual new king, right? It was Pharaoh Ramses III, and this was, the previous king was, who knows, Pharaoh Ramses II, right? We know that in the history of the monarchy, we are blessed to have Queen Elizabeth II now. She succeeded from King Edward, right? Right.
No, King George.
King George. Sorry, King George. Who succeeded from whatever. Okay, so
George VI.
George VI, and then way back to Victoria. So and way back all the way. But we know people have very, not like us. We have a very sharp knowledge of the dynastic history. We know who was king before whom, etc., etc. And any culture that lives around its dynasties knows, the sequence of its kings. In the United States, we demarcate American history by the presidential administrations, and I don't need to go into that anymore. Okay. All right. So we have two opinions here. Rav Ushmuel, one says it's a new king. One says, nah, it's not a new king. It's the same king, but new policies. Same king, new policies. That's a very subtle understanding of politics. Because sometimes you can have we all understand, that when you move from administration to administration, you're going to get new policies. This is true down the line in political structures that are as big as your family, which is a political unit, to all the way up to communities, organizations, companies, corporations, and of course, all levels of government. When you change the leader, you are going to change the policies. Occasionally, leaders will have great fidelity to previous policies, but most leaders, by their very personality and orientations, are going to change policies based on their own vision and their own sense of the situation. That's just the way the world works, folks. So you have new leaders and new policies. But Shmuel is saying, that's true, Rav. Yes, you have new leaders and new policies, but sometimes you have the same leaders who change their policies midway. And when the leader changes usually his policy midstream, that does something. And that change affects the whole system. It's one thing, look, we're on the verge of a change of administration. So, everybody understands that you're going to get a new administration and a new sets of policies, okay? What would be if you had the same administration and all of a sudden, barreling down and new policy that is radically different? In this case, it's policies relating to the Jews. Look, we are very, ethnocentric when it comes to looking at politics. Imagine you are, another group or another, interest, and policies change with the same administration. So this idea happens a lot. All right, so now, because this is a debate, and because this is a rabbinic debate, it's a Talmudic debate, it's found in the Talmud, it's quoted in the Midrash here, we have to understand what the reasoning is behind the debate, and the reasoning could be logic or textual. So the reasoning of the one who says that he was an actual new king is that the text says it's new, right? It's like duh. Why are you like Rav, who says it's a new king? So if he was asked, why do you say it was a new king? So he says, well, because the text says it was a new king. The text says new, so therefore new is new. Read the text, read it on its pshat, its plain interpretation, and new, melech chadash, it's chadash mamash, okay? But the reasoning of the one who says that he updated or revised his decrees is that the text doesn't explicitly state the old king died and a new king. I love this. This is a gorgeous example of Talmudic debate, because it says, look, the text says one thing. But if it wanted to say exactly that thing, it would have stated specifically something that tells you what you are trying to state. And because it doesn't state explicitly that the previous king died, how do I know that it's a new king? You know the joke. The Talmudic cup, right? Talmudic cup, two men come down from a chimney. How did one goes? Yeah, okay, fine. All right, not going to go there. All right, so here it's exactly this. According to Rav, Melech Hadash, the text says. According to Shmuel, Melech Hadash, it's the same Melech, it's the same king, because the text never tells us that the previous king died, who did not know Joseph. So, according to the opinion of the one who said that it was an actual king, it makes sense, obviously. If he's a new guy, he doesn't know Joseph. Right? He's Ramses III, Ramses II knew Joseph. Ramses III, was but Joseph is like history. did not know Joseph did not really, have any relationship with Joseph. It's like saying, oh, what would be the equivalent? It's like saying, uh, the George W. Bush is the president, and he doesn't know, although he does, the people in the Clinton administration, right? He doesn't know the whoever the chief of staff is, or whatever equivalent you can come up with. There are lots of analogies you can make. So, Asher lo yada Yosef, if he's a new king, of course he doesn't know. But to the one who has the opinion of this, who says it's the same king, but he updated or revises his creeds, what is his rationale for arriving at his explanation? The new king behaved as if he did not know Joseph at all. In other words, or that king, it's the old king, I should have said here, the old king. So you have either it's really a new king, therefore he doesn't know Joseph, or it's the old king and he behaves in a new way. That's very interesting. It means that you can have a relationship with someone, and all of a sudden the relationship changes overnight. I'm going to stop here and make myself here. So the idea is that you are humming along as the public, and your leader you have solid relations with your leader. You have requests, you lobby, you do whatever you need to do. In the most perfunctory kinds of things that happen in the course of governments and the governed, right? We ask our leaders for things that are in their power and control. I'll give you a kind of mundane example, which is, I don't know if you can still do this, but God forbid, you would need a visa or a passport or something. Now you can expedite it, but it used to be that if you needed travel documents very quickly, what did you do? You called your senator, right? Or you called Roy, right? You call someone who knows someone. You call your senator and you say, it's an emergency. I need it. And they have their third person, the person above the coffee, donut person, go out and get you your passport. And that's because you have a relationship with your senator. You've raised money, you chummy, and you vote and you show up and you do things for each other, right? Well, one day your senator says, you know what, Malamet never shows up to any of my meetings, never shows up to any of my things, or you know what, I don't want to have anything to do with them. I just don't like, how he cut his hair today, and relationships can be that way. I'm trivializing, obviously, but for whatever reason, the relationship can change. So then you say, well, I got to go and get my passport, or I got to go and get a visa. And he says, nothing doing it. Go away. I don't have to help you. You'll suffer. Ruth, go ahead.
I think the Purim story is a little bit parallel, because we have Ahasuerus. That would be a case of a king. It's the same king, but his policies change. So Haman points out to him, these Jews, they're really causing you a problem. And then in terms of Asher lo Zachar Yosef, or whatever the word was, it's like he didn't remember Mordechai. He didn't remember that Mordechai saved him from Bigtan and Teresh. And it's kind of a whole, I don't know, it's kind of a parallel story.
Absolutely. All of these court, stories are parallel because they involve a sovereign and the subject. And what's so amazing about the Purim story altogether, and here, entire books have been written on this subject, is that the political role of Jews close to power is fascinating. And we have some of that tradition even down to this day. You'll see later on in this presentation that I'm not going to say it, direct. I'm not going to say that there's a direct line of continuity from Mordechai to AIPAC, but I think the case could be made that if we are talking about preserving the Jewish interests, the interests of the Jewish people, and putting them at the forefront of the government's agenda, then that role falls on interested parties within the Jewish community, represented by leaders of organizations such as Federation, Israel Bonds, AJC, ADL, and AIPAC, which is primarily concerned with policy towards Israel, which is one of the central pillars of American Jewish identity and involvement today. So that's a very strong case to be made. Okay, Ilana.
It seems to me that it's a little strange that the new king, or whichever king, did not know Yosef, who performed such a big, almost a miracle with the famine and saved the country and did such a had such unusual achievements. So it seems like the king did not want to know Yosef, but not to know him at all is a little strange.
I think that's a very fascinating observation. And the reason why I say it's fascinating, because it would be the equivalent of saying, in the American context, it's like saying, I don't remember what, Lincoln did. How can you not remember what Lincoln was such a pivotal president? There are some presidents that we don't even recall anything about them, and here, there are people that fade from memory because they're not memorable, and there are people who fade from memory because we expunge them from memory.
Because it's not such a long time ago. Because
it's not politically useful for the leader to have the active memory of this person. I'll get, well, this is a debate raging now, in terms of who is remembered, in America, who is on statues, right? And who gets buildings named for them. There are people who have their names on buildings that nobody really knows anymore. And the active expunging of names from buildings by certain groups of activists is a way to say, we no longer want this history, we no longer adhere to this history, or this history no longer represents our values. And that dynamic goes on constantly in a population, because the population is always trying to either be informed by its past or reconcile with its past. I think the shattering of statues is a way of kind of erasing the past. When we don't engage with the past and try and erase the past, I think we're in for a lot of problems, no matter how much we disagree with what they may have been or represented. But that's a different, well, it's the same debate. What does it mean? It means the new king wants to actively erase the previous king and the previous king's relationships and Joseph. So it's not that he doesn't know Joseph, Ilana, I think you're right. It's that he wants to expunge Joseph from the record, like, more like Soviet era history, right? Go ahead, Mike.
And in Egypt, they didn't have books, so they would just erase hieroglyphics from the side of a building or from the side of an obelisk, and then they wouldn't owe any favors to the Jews.
Right. Good. Bob.
One of the things to me that's missing in the text, which I'd be interested in, is as compared to the Jewish leaders who are inspired by their encounters with Hashem in terms of things, we don't hear that as to how the pharaohs and their relationship with the Egyptian gods may be guiding any of their decision making, especially given that some of the plagues, as I read someplace, were direct attacks against Egyptian gods within their pantheon. So I'm curious, did the rabbis comment, this is obviously written from a Jewish perspective, but are they saying that God plays no role in Pharaoh's decision making?
Well, we're going to see how God plays a role in Pharaoh's decision making. You know, the story of the Exodus really is not a story of God versus the gods of Egypt. It's a story of God versus Pharaoh. Pharaoh being the ultimate in, you know, a pagan, the pagan ideal, which is that the pagan ideal of having power being venerated and represented by a symbol of the god, namely the sovereign. So the Torah's real battle here is with idolatry as it's reflected in Pharaoh himself. And the way that the Torah does this, as we'll see in consecutive parshas, subsequent parshas, is God will harden Pharaoh's heart. God removes Pharaoh's humanness, his ability to make free decisions. So in a way, by hardening his heart, one interpretation is plausible, is that he is reducing Pharaoh into an object of stone, that is someone who is incapable of making a free decision. Okay. Any other comments?
I guess what I was saying is that we don't really know whether the new king changed because he also consulted with his ministers and with his Egyptian gods who said, you should harden and make life bad for the Hebrews.
So it's clear from the rabbis, at least, that he's not consulting with any ecclesiastical or religious authorities, but he is astutely aware of public opinion. And this is, I think, look, I want to say this with tongue in cheek and with a kind of wry smile towards our ancestors, our rabbinic ancestors, who are revealing a very astute wisdom, appraisal of human behavior. They get it. They have observed the way people in power operate. And you don't need to get a BA in political science. They are watching how people in power work around them. And they see that people in power are motivated by the people that they govern, and they have their own interests. And part of their own interests include exerting power, right? And dominating. Okay, let's go back to the text. Marlene, I'm sorry, go ahead.
If we step back and look at the behavior, the way Joseph treated the people of Egypt, he sold them back the things that they had given. So we don't know how they felt about him, but it doesn't say that he sold it to his family that was living next door in Goshen. So that maybe when it says the king spoke to his people, that there is this interplay of why are we being oppressed and they're not? So that in a way, Joseph set up this whole scenario.
I think that's also a very, very astute observation. You know, we remarked a couple of weeks ago when Joseph made the policies that eventually indentured the Egyptian population, you wonder what the backlash of that is going to be. And I would say that it's not an accident that here the rabbis are finding the animus against the Jews in the people itself, because the people, Joseph was an outsider, and Joseph's policies created tremendous hardship for the Egyptians, notwithstanding the fact that he saved them. Right?
What have you done for me lately?
Exactly.
Those 14 years are over, and now the king doesn't have to worry about it anymore.
Right. You know, one of my colleagues, Rabbi Kalmanovsky, pointed out that there's a source. It's one scholar found of the foreign person putting all the difficult policies in that gives Pharaoh an excuse to blame someone, if it goes wrong. And I think that Joseph becomes a very convenient foil for Pharaoh. If things go right, I get the credit. If things go wrong, it's his fault. Okay, let's go into the continuation of the text here, and you'll see how this dynamics at play here. The rabbis ask, Rabbanan Amri, why did they call him a new king? Lama kara'o melech hadash, v'lo paro atzmoya. He was the Pharaoh himself. Rather, we should imagine that the Egyptians said to Pharaoh, come, let's harass this people. He answered, you're crazy. Up until now, we've been eating because of them. Were it not for Joseph, we would be alive. This is the beautiful way the rabbis are saying exactly what you're saying. Means let's get them, let's harass them. Crazy fools. We're eating because of them. We're going to harass them. So he's saying, look, were it not for Joseph, we wouldn't be here. You know, we have to be at least appreciative. We have to have some measure of appreciation for them. Well, so what happened was, Kivan Shalosh Amalahem, he didn't listen. Because he didn't listen to them, they took him off the throne. Horidu mikiso, shlosha chadashim, 3 months. And he said to them, Kol ma shetem rotzim areini machem, everything you want to do, I'm with you. And thus they re-enthroned him. Thus it says in A New King is Ready, which is beautiful. It's an amazing story, which says as follows. The king is not a person with a spine. He's willing to be subjected only to 3 months of a penalty. How they don't, depose him altogether and have a coup d'etat is I think, a question, that's not answered here in this text. I that would be my question to the rabbis, which why not go so far as to say that they deposed him and put a new king instead? I think it's sharper this way. It's saying, and it's sharper when they say it's the same king. They put him in cold storage for 3 months, and they say, okay, now what do you think about the Jews? He goes, okay, no problem, right? And I guess they had reverence for the authority of this dynasty to not depose him. And it also tells you, that in revolutions, you got to have something, you got to have a compelling leader to replace the existing leader. So maybe they didn't have a good leader to replace him with. Go ahead, Marlene.
We know how old the king was, because if you look in the movies, if he was older than Joseph, when Joseph's family died, he would have died too, and his son would come up, and he didn't know Joseph.
So that's very good, and that is also one of the unsolved riddles of this whole passage, which is if he is a contemporary of Joseph, then we are collapsing time a little bit, right? Or we're saying that he must have lived a very, very long life. So it becomes more compelling to say, well, maybe it's a new pharaoh that arose at the end of the Joseph reign, or maybe it's one commentator on this question says, don't get bogged down by this question. It's really the same dynastic household. And so what they're pointing to here is not that it's a new king, but that king is a metonymy for the household of something, the house of Orient, whatever, the whole new household monarch, whole new dynasty, basically.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Yeah. On the other hand, because there's always another hand, if Pharaoh was actually a young Pharaoh, then, he could have said, it's like, I had these dreams, and this guy comes along, and maybe he's older than Pharaoh, and says, this is what they mean, and this is what you got to do. And now he's faced with this dream interpreter who's even older than he is, and is telling him, you got to appoint somebody. And the Pharaoh doesn't know what else to do. He says, okay, you're older
Absolutely.
than me.
So that makes a lot of sense too. It could have been a young Pharaoh. Look, we're so influenced by popular interpretations of this. Yul Brynner, okay? So, Yul Brynner, he was a young guy when he was in the movie, but okay. All right. So I did a little bit of walking in the internet, and I wanted to explore this idea of kings who change their policies, right? You're humming along as Jews, and all of a sudden you have a change in policy, and lo and behold, of course, we have the first major expulsion of Jews in Jewish history, the expulsion of the Jews of England. So it's an example of change in policy against the Jews by the same king, Edward I, who lived from 1239 to 1307. His reign was 1272 to 1307. So 18 years after he ascends the throne, he kicks the Jews out of England. And this is simply a source on the internet, but when I looked And again, you can go down lots and lots of different routes. It gets so interesting. You know, we don't have time to read 15 books on the history of Jews in medieval England, which I would do ordinarily if I was in a course. But we have this little quote here. The first significant migration of Jews to England came after the Norman invasion in 1066. By the late 1200s, England had a small Jewish population of around 3,000 people. Throughout this period, the Jews suffered from anti-Semitic prejudice, often scapegoated or wrongly accused of crimes. There were frequent riots against them in which their property was destroyed and citizens murdered. Many Jews were employed as moneylenders. The Jews took these jobs because the Christian church traditionally ruled that usury, money lending for interest, was illegal for Christians, but not for Jews. The Jews were taxed heavily, so the wealth earned in the usury trade benefited the crown directly. So in other words, they lent money at interest, and the kings, the monarchy, prospered because they taxed them. However, by the late 1200s, a series of laws have been created restricting the rights of the Jewish people. For instance, they were not allowed to land. After the death of their money went not to their children, but to the crown. In 1275, King Edward I passed a law forbidding the Jews from usury. They were entitled to earn a living as tradesmen or farmers, but were not allowed to be part of the guilds or to own farmland. The Jews became poor, and the king could no longer collect taxes for them. Many hundreds were arrested, hanged, or imprisoned. And then finally, in 1290, they were banished from England altogether. Jews were not allowed to return to England until 1656. The illustration shown here are the margins of the Rochester Cross. So this is an illustration of beating up Jews, okay? What we're saying here is, I'll go back to you guys, there were steady, edicts or steady decline in relations between the population and the Jews of England. It's, I'm using the frame of the Exodus story to understand the experience of Jews in exile. Jews are brought in. There's a benevolent, monarch who allows the Jews to live. The Jews are allowed to do certain things that the Christians are not allowed to do, namely lend money. It's to the advantage of the monarch and the 100 years of English monarchs. The Jews become very prosperous doing this. The people get very angry at the Jews because the Jews are getting wealthier, and the Christian church is responsive to public opinion, and it's the Christian church that put pressure on the monarch to change policies. In the little reading I did on this, that's what's happening. And sure enough, by 1275, the new king puts a new edict out, and then by 1290, he says, "You're out of here. Get out of here." And they start really killing Jews. There had been other skirmishes and massacres of Jews in England, the York Massacre, which is already in the 12th century. But you can see that, we reading the Bible are seeing a pattern here. The pattern is that Jews go into a certain land, they establish themselves, and they prosper. And then what happens? A new king arises, or the same king with new policies because of a shift in public opinion. That is Judaism. Let's go on. All right. Another example, and you will appreciate this. We'll just sit back and watch this for a second. The Jews of Cordoba. Simon Schama with his lecture.
Cordoba was a city of gardens, fountains, canals, and posts delivered by carrier pigeon. The Mesquita, the great mosque built by the Umayyads, stands as the architectural consummation of their ambition. But in the shadow of the mosques were the synagogues, and they too wove worldliness with holiness to create patterns of intoxicating beauty, an impulse that endured for centuries. And inspired by Arabic models, that same note was sounded in the poetry of the Sephardim, a literature that gave the Hebrew language a startling new life outside of the synagogue. Just listen to this. Last night, a gazelle of a girl showed me the sun of her cheek, and the veil of her auburn hair was like a ruby falling over a dampened crystal brow. She was like the fires of dawn's rising, reddening the clouds with its flames. You don't find words like that coming out of the ultra-Orthodox of either Judaism or Islam today, but they were the words of Yehuda Halevi, a poet of sensual love, but also a deeply devout Jew for whom there was no distinction at all between the physical and the spiritual. For the first time,
Get back, Frank, okay?
the lofty language of the Bible and the Talmud was used by Jewish writers to embrace the earthiness of
Yeah,
life.
I got the, no, I'm taking a course on
Sex.
on Zoom.
Brand new, unprecedented moment.
Yes, thank you, okay.
But this heyday of Judeo-Arabic culture came to an end in the 12th century as rival monotheists fought for control of Sepharad. The reconquest of Spain by Christian kings gathered pace from the north, while from the south, fundamentalist Islamic warriors from Morocco supplanted the more worldly Islamic rulers of Al-Andalus. Caught between cross and crescent, the Jews suffered from the intolerance of both. In the 13th century, Muslim rule in Andalusia collapsed. The Mezquita in Cordoba was turned from mosque to cathedral. The future for the Jews of Europe now lay under the shadow of the cross.
Okay, beautiful. That's PBS and Simon Schama. And here again, change of regimes means change of policies. We're going to compress another 200 years of Jewish history to go from the Christian conquest of Spain to the Inquisition and then the expulsion in 1492. And you'll see, I mean, I'm not, and we obviously don't have time to go through this. I'm just going to pull up the proper thing. Hang on, I'm sorry. Back to this. Okay. Let me share this. Okay, so we have to while we're indulging in video, you want to see the moment here.
That one is apprenticed to a carpenter. I'm Yanko. Did I ask you? Yanko, the skinny one, is apprentice.
Mama, is Reb Tevi in the house?
He's in the barn. Is there trouble? Get inside, children. What is it? What's the matter?
Tevi, have you seen the constable lately? No.
Sorry.
There's some rumors in town. We thought since you knew him so well, maybe he told you what is true, what is not.
Rumors? What rumors?
Someone from Zolodin told me there was an edict issued in St. Petersburg that all...
Your Honor, what's the good news in the world? I see that you have company. They are my friends.
It's just as well. What I have to say is for their ears also. Tell you how much time do you need to sell your house and all your household goods?
Why should I sell my house? Is it in anybody's way?
I came here to tell you that you are going to have to leave Anatevka.
And And how did I come to deserve such an honor?
Not just you, but all of you. At first I thought you might be spared, Tevye, because of the marriage of your daughter.
My daughter is dead.
I understand. At any rate, it affects all of you. You have to leave.
But this corner of the world has always been our home.
Yes.
Why should we leave?
I don't know why. There's trouble in the world. Troublemakers.
Like us.
You're not the only ones. Your people must leave all the villages. Zolodin, Rablevka. The entire district must be empty. I have an order here. It says that you must sell your homes and be out of here in 3 days.
How do you say children?
And you who have known us all your life, you'd carry out this order?
I have nothing to do with it. Don't you understand? I wish you wouldn't say me.
Suppose we refuse to go?
You will be forced out.
We'll defend ourselves.
We'll stay in our homes.
Refuse to
We
move. Keep on that. Fight against our militia, our army. I wouldn't advise that.
I have some advice for you. Get off my land. This is still my home, my land. Get off my land.
Okay, wow. It's really one of the most powerful scenes in the whole movie. Get off my, and then, you know, there's a beautiful documentary on Film on the Roof. It's on Amazon Prime called Miracle of Miracles. You should really watch it. And they have a scene from the play, the most recent Broadway play. It doesn't come anywhere close to the power of that scene. Get off my land, you know, Chaim Topol. It's just remarkable. Okay, so I put that out, you know, that's an example, you know, obviously there's the historical truth there, which is that Jews lived under the Tsarist Russia and were persecuted at the whim of different policies and changes in policy based on the Tsar, based on the people. And you know, here, what is being played here is, you know, and throughout the whole story, Tevye has the relationship with the Tsarist police and the you know, that relationship is basically ruptured here. So the people-to-people relationship is very fickle, as any student of Eastern Europe will attest. Okay, well, we're coming very close to the end of our time. Let me just go back to the obvious changes, and I want to explore this with you. This was an article published a couple of years ago in Tablet magazine on, and here, of course, this is an overview of the Nazi policies, but what I wanted to look at, we pretty much know the story here. 1933, the Nazi rise to power. Oops, sorry. The 1933 and the Aryanization, but what we don't have is a real knowledge of is how did Jews react? And I was interested in this question because when it says Vayakom Melech Hadash, it's very nice for the Torah to say, you know, there was a new king who arose. And of course, we read subsequently in the next several verses what the policies were, but how do the people react? Okay, so here is Robert Walkaway's article. For lack of time, we're going to just jump to the basic things. There was a B'nai B'rith. They had 15,000 members of 107 lodges in a B'nai B'rith in Germany. And here is a letter written in 1933 by an elderly physician to his daughter living in the United States, expresses the author's anguish, disillusionment, and anger at what has befallen him and those in his profession. Your dear mother, owing to bad health, is in danger of her life. And this is the main reason why I left Berlin as fast as possible. Nothing had happened to me personally up until then. I myself face a complete breakdown of my nerves. I surely could not have managed to keep quiet in case of a controversy. What that would have meant, other doctors have found out with their lives. Now, after a few days in Paris, where people do not look at you with eyes of hatred, where they are friendly and human, I can breathe again, which I could not do lately at home. And for that, I had to lose my father in the war. For that, I had to leave wife and children to risk my life as a volunteer during the war, World War I. I had to lose everything and build up after the war an existence so that my family would not suffer hunger. For that, I was proud when I was 60 years old to have only few enemies and many friends, and to enjoy reputation and esteem, to now end my life as a second-grade citizen. These methods are so much more cruel than anything in anti-Semitism up to now, because they did not kill in one day 13,000, after which the beast would calm down. But now, in cold reasoning, hundreds of thousands of Jews are being destroyed spiritually, physically, morally, and financially, finally, economically. And even if this present storm should subside, it would break out time and again as soon as economic difficulties make Hitler's success impossible. You cannot allow a big party of untamed youth to shout continuously, "Perish Jews." Then Jews simply have to perish. That is what these brutal elements now demand. I bespeak you to destroy this letter because I do not wish to contribute one iota, lest Germany's reputation should be damaged by me. Indeed, thanks to my friends in my position, I have not received anything but good from Germany, so that I now do not wish to seem ungrateful. But now, unfortunately, everything is dark. And in this spirit, I just wanted to open my sick heart to you to relieve myself. But I ask you to please be careful so that not through you anything may become known. For every attack in foreign countries reacts in Germany on its Jewish citizens. They alone have to suffer for what others sin. Finally, be very careful when you write to us, because after the inquiry at the American consulate, every one of your letters has been opened. So basically what's going on here is that you can see the change in policy and the change in regime is driving people crazy, and they're beside themselves. They don't know what to do. And we're seeing in real time in that letter the exasperation of someone who, for all these years we've been loyal German citizens. We even fought, we even died, we raised our families, we produced, we entered the professions, we added to Germany, and look what's happening to us. We can't understand this. And Vayakom Melech Hadash is not a statement of politics and political relations. What that letter is showing me, and others in that article, and I really urge you to read it, is that the whole sense of the world turned upside down for us. I want to end with another set of items that are themselves worthy of numerous lectures, and that is the following. Okay, so here there are more letters here. These are more letters written from Nancy Jar. I'm going too fast, I know, I'm sorry. And I'm just scrolling down to get my, so US policy toward, where this item lives is in US policy towards Israel. And if you just want to take a look for a moment at what AIPAC has produced for the next Congress, which was seated over the weekend, okay? So this is, what we have here is the briefing book. All right, do you see this on your page? This is the Congress and the U.S.-Israel relationship?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a book that AIPAC sends out to every freshman member of Congress. okay, saying what we are about and what U.S.-Israel policy is about, because they anticipate that there will be policy differences emerging in a new administration. And we can't go through the whole thing, obviously, but there are pillars of the U.S.-Israel relationship. Okay, the last thing I want to show you is this item here, which is this is one example of policy and policy differences. This is from the Jewish Virtual Library, State Department, U.S. policy regarding settlements. In this letter from the State Department, Lewis legal advisor Herbert Hansel expresses the opinion that the establishment of civilian settlements in those territories is inconsistent with international law. This was consistent with the views of President Carter at the time, who was critical of Israeli settlement policy. The Reagan administration rejected this analysis. The Obama administration agreed with Carter. The Trump administration concluded that the Reagan administration's interpretation was the correct one. Legal scholar Eugene Kontorovich has noted that the Hansel said that the state of occupation would end if Israel entered into a peace treaty with Jordan, which it did in 1994. Nevertheless, the State Department never updated this memo. In other words, we have existing policy from 30, 40 years ago that has been, revised. There are revised policies in the United States relating to a specific item in Israel, namely the territories, and how to see the territories. Are the settlements legal or illegal? Some scholars say that they're illegal. Some scholars say that those rules don't apply. And how you engage in policy directs what the actions are, what the relationship is. So, one of the things that is going on in the U.S.-Israel, the pro-Israel community is, I don't want to overstate it, because Biden has generally been, very supportive of Israel, but the jitters of what will be the change in policy from what is universally regarded as, someone who has been, pro-Israel in the sense of moving the embassy to Jerusalem, et cetera, all the things that I know I'll get myself in trouble for saying here, to give check marks for, but what's the status of the Iran deal? What's the status of the settlements? What's the status of the two-state solution? What's the status of the Golan Heights? What's the status of the embassy? All of those things are not genocidal, obviously, and it's not about hating Jews, but it's about, well, if we have little policy differences in a new regime, how are the people going to be affected? I guarantee you that if Biden re-enters a path towards negotiation with Iran, some sectors of the American Jewish community will erupt with a kind of, how can you do this? Look what they're doing. They're up to 20%. They foment terrorism around the world, around the Middle East. We have to maintain the maximal pressure, et cetera, et cetera. There is a significant sector of the American Jewish community that will get very emboldened by a change in policy and feel threatened by this, in the same way, that Jews throughout history have feel apprehensive and anxious when a new leader comes who has a solid record, of course, with regard to the Jewish people, but changes a policy. And a change in policy will set everybody on edge, will make everybody kind of nervous. And that is an interesting dynamic. It's through the frame of the biblical story that we see the grander political issues working themselves out. I would never go as far as to say, this is anti-Semitic. No, I'm not going to say that at all. But from the view of history, we see that policy changes, people changes, administration change everything. The people that we have, that the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community has in place, they're the ones that are doing it. You can guarantee, okay? I know this because of, I go to the conferences and I listen to the speakers and I'm on calls with people organizing. They've been working on the new Congress from the end of the last Congress. When every 2 years there's an election. When a congressional election ends, AIPAC is already looking at the next election in 2 years and who the people would be in the pipeline. And when a presidential election ends, as it has, and we haven't, they're already looking at 2024, okay? Because they're trying to be ahead of the game in terms of what will policies be. That's the way it works in as far as this relationship is concerned. So it's a far, far cry from chapter 1 of the book of Exodus, but actually the themes are quite consistent. And that's what makes this so rich and so very powerful. I'll end with a few questions or comments. Bob, go ahead.
I just wanted to say that one of the other things that strikes me is that the leaders are often men. And one of the things that there's not time, obviously, to talk about is the incredible role of the 6 women who actually are challenging the leadership in terms of the Pharaoh's daughter and the others going forward. So I'm wondering if there's also, this is the first time women's voices are expressed so much, I think, in the Torah. Am I correct?
So sorry for interrupting. So what you're referring to, there are some characters within the first chapters of the book of Exodus, named, not named, who are important in the story. And I saw this comment, the same comment in an interview recently also. So Daniel Hartman makes this point, I think. So 6 characters, who are they? Shifra, Pua, Yocheved, Miriam, there's Pharaoh's daughter is Batya, and who would be the 6th one? The 6th one would be Zipporah, right? Zipporah, Moses' wife. So without these 6 women, you have no story. And the story, and since this class is mostly women, bravo women, way to go women. Okay.
But they're challenging the policy of the leaders, aren't they? So when you
what
say
I didn't take time to look at is the reaction, the resistance, and the resistance to these policies is primarily through women. I mean, we could spend a whole class on how the policies play themselves out in the population. In the Midrash, Amram divorces his wife, and Miriam forces or encourages him to remarry his wife. It's very, very, I'll write this in the Parsha sheet this week, okay? I'll mention it in the Parsha sheet so that we can give equal play here. Go ahead, Ruth.
I just want to point out what Robert said. Stay tuned, because the March Sisterhood meeting is Stephanie Dickstein talking about exactly this, the role of the Egyptian women. So watch your mail, because we will be discussing.
All right, can't have enough women. Go ahead. Any other comments? Any other reactions, questions? All right. We will leave it there then. Thank you so much, as always. It's been great. I have so much fun.